And we're back with our political panel. Ruth Marcus is a Washington Post columnist and the deputy editorial page editor. Ben Domenech is the founder and publisher of The Federalist. We're also joined by our chief congressional correspondent, Nancy Cordes, and David Nakamura, who covers the White House for the Washington Post. David, I want to start with you. Last Sunday, we were here talking about a new communications director at the White House. Now we're talking about a new chief of staff. The organizational chart is rumbling. Where are things in the White House?
Well, you guys talked a little bit about this. I think the biggest thing for incoming Chief of Staff Kelly is to establish more direct lines of communication and a little bit less chaos in the West Wing and the Oval Office itself. I mean, this is a president, I think Major Garrett touched on it earlier in your show, that people can kind of walk in carte blanche into the Oval Office, and President Trump likes that. He likes to hear different opinions, but I think most chiefs of staff, one of their biggest jobs is to control access to the president so that he has a little bit clearer channels. And I think this is, the idea that a general, a four-star general, would instill that kind of discipline is what we're looking at. But as you've said before, the biggest challenge, though, is Trump himself, because he does like that. And obviously Trump's own, he's also been calling around at off hours to friends outside the White House in New York and other places to get input.
And Ruth, this is not the first. We had this, also the deputy chief of staff has gone from the White House, communications director, press secretary, national security advisor, and the FBI director from this administration. So this is a pattern.
And counting.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
In one sense, that actually might strengthen General Kelly's hand, because how many more can you afford to lose? Maybe in Trump world, you can just keep on running through them. But clearly, an ally of the White House told me yesterday, Trump has left denial. So he's not in the denial phase, I'm told, anymore, where he thinks this is all going great and he's signing executive orders and everything is just hunky-dory. But there are stages, as we know. So has he gotten to acceptance? And I think David puts his finger on the really important thing, which is General Kelly could impose some order and discipline. It can't get any worse, right, as we saw this week on this crazy, chaotic White House. But can he get President Trump to change? Does President Trump want to change? Is President Trump capable of changing? Talked to a lot of former White House chiefs of staff yesterday. I heard the word patch a lot. You can patch this, but you can't necessarily fix it.
Ben, if moving to the acceptance stage is important, we also heard Anthony Scaramucci say, let Trump be Trump, what they used to say about Ronald Reagan. Is that just what you say publicly and then you fix things underneath it? What's the remedy here? White Houses are allowed to stumble, so what do you do to fix it?
Well, I think that this is a significant step. It's potentially a turning point in the early stages of this administration, a pivot away from perhaps loyalty to a GOP establishment, which had been injected into this White House after a campaign in which they were very often at odds. Reince Priebus was a very effective RNC leader. He obviously rebuilt the party after financial troubles and contributed certainly to Donald Trump's win. But as the chief of staff, he really had no legislative or executive experience beforehand, and it showed. They were planning to have him early on play a more significant role because of his close relationship with Paul Ryan. But after the legislative failures that you've seen come out of the Congress in the early going of this administration, I think this is a potential pivot away from being as close to the GOP establishment with leadership within Washington, and potentially a willingness to be more of the kind of president that Donald Trump kind of indicated he was going to be before he won, one who was going to disrupt potentially the policy discussions that we have. I think General Kelly is going to have a significant task before him in terms of reorganization, in terms of setting up lines of command, and we'll see what happens once he starts Monday, how firm of a hand he holds when it comes to that organizational chart.
Nancy, this notion of disruption and moving away from the Republican Party, that would have to give heartburn to the Republican leaders in Congress, because they would be the principal target, and we see the president targeting those Republicans, saying two different things. One, kind of reminding everyone of their failure on health care, and two, saying you got to move to 51 votes in the Senate, get rid of the 60-vote threshold. How do you see it? You spent a lot of time on the Hill.
Well, on one hand, they have a lot of respect for General Kelly, and if anyone could impose order, it would be him. On the other hand, they're not incredibly optimistic. I mean, this is a president who hired a four-star general and Anthony Scaramucci in the same week. They could not be more different, one incredibly destabilizing, obviously. And so while they have a lot of faith in Kelly, they believe that this is a president who isn't interested in anyone telling him what to do. In fact, we know in the past aides avoid telling him what he should do because he will often subversively do the opposite. And so, you know, they liked Reince Priebus. They were very vocal about that. They didn't think that he did anything wrong. They're welcoming of General Kelly, but there's probably a reason why Kelly reportedly turned down the president's offer to be chief of staff a number of times before he finally said yes.
And we know about that piece of information because someone leaked it, David, which takes me to my next question, and appreciate the transition, Nancy. The question of leaks. Anthony Scaramucci was in an interview with the New Yorker infuriated about the leak question. So is that going to get fixed?
Well, look, I mean, this came after this private dinner at the White House with Fox News executives, and Scaramucci left the meeting and learned that it had been already reported by the reporter from the New Yorker, and sort of flipped out, called him, and thought maybe that he was off the record, but there had been nothing said about that, and all this became public. And what's interesting is I think Scaramucci was taking that line because he recognizes that Donald Trump is really upset about what he sees as unfair leaks on the Russia investigation, on other scandals around the presidency. And so this thing did not seem to be that big a deal, but I think you saw Scaramucci trying to ingratiate himself with the boss. But all this goes back to a little bit to what you said in the previous segment. As the president's approval ratings continue to crater, the White House seems to be coalescing, or certainly the president, around sort of just appeal directly to the base. And so the president is going to continue tweeting, continue to get this kind of message out that he's, that he's under attack, under assault, which plays well with this small segment that is still loyal to him.
Ben, leaks, getting rid of leaks in a White House. That cannot be done.
It certainly can't be done, but I don't think that it was helped by the fact that you had a lot of people in this White House who really were not in part of Trump's sort of corner during the primary and during the general process. There were a lot of people who were there who, frankly, Reince Priebus and others at the RNC had brought over, who I think did not feel at home within this White House, objected to a lot of the things that they were doing. And I think that General Kelly's task is actually going to not so much focus on the leaking part of it, but on the organizational part and determining, who's getting information that shouldn't be getting that information. Why do we have kind of this sieve effect of people fighting all the time in proxy wars within the press? That's not something that can be solved overnight.
Right. I was struck, Ruth, just before Anthony Scaramucci said this week that people were in the White House who thought they had to protect the president from the country. That's a grim view of the people in the White House.
And kind of illustrative of where we are. I thought that was one of the most interesting things that was said this week, and I actually kind of felt better about it. I want people who feel like they need to protect the country from the president there, because the president is, and these are the things that's going to be the hardest for General Kelly to fix. The president is impulsive. The president has very little in the way of attention span. The president is undisciplined. The president not only does not want to be controlled, he chafes and reacts to control by showing people that they can't control him. So this focus on leaks, every White House has leaks. No White House likes leaks. No White House can end leaks. The reason there are leaks in this White House is that the president has deliberately set up a White House with factions, with division, and he not only tolerates that, to some extent he encourages that. And to the extent that that amazing tirade by Anthony Scaramucci fed into and reflected things that the president likes, this sort of toughness, that illustrates the continuing problem that General Kelly and that President Trump are going to face.
Right. So when you have factions, people are constantly still fighting that war, and they take it into the pages of the newspaper so that they can win in that factional fight. Nancy, let me ask you and get your thoughts on Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, former senator who you covered. I was struck that Chairman Grassley of the Judiciary Committee said, no, I mean, the pushback from Republicans was quite amazing.
Right. And Senator Flake said to you earlier on this broadcast that we have to pick our battles. We can't fight against the president on everything. But this is one of those issues where Republicans almost universally thought, A, this was incredibly unfair what the president was doing to Jeff Sessions, and B, politically very risky. And so they wanted to send him a message, don't do this. You are getting yourself into a lot of trouble. But at the same time, they do still have that core of supporters that Anthony Salvanto just talked about. And so they don't want to speak out directly against the president on every issue. So yes, you had your Lindsey Graham saying this could be the end of the Trump presidency if he does this, but most of them spoke out in favor of Jeff Sessions, saying we think he's done a great job. They didn't say say the president is being incredibly unfair to Sessions for potentially very personal reasons.
What's interesting too, though, is Sessions appeals to that same base that are a lot of Trump's biggest supporters, and you saw Breitbart, really go after the president on this sort of, attacking Sessions, based on the idea that Sessions is doing a lot for that agenda, which is getting tough on immigration, getting tough on crime. And so you're seeing the same appeal being made to the same base of Trump supporters that also largely support a lot of that agenda, a lot of what Sessions is trying to do.
I think that it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of this. The president is a fan of sending messages via the press toward people, but I'm not sure that in this case it's indicative of an interest in actually booting Sessions from his position. It seems to be more, the gripe that he has is frankly that he doesn't believe that Sessions should have recused himself, and he believes that if he was going to recuse himself in this manner, that he should have told the president at the time that he was picking him. And that's a gripe that he's repeatedly said. I don't think, though, that in this case you're going to see him actually take the step of pushing him out, in part because so many Republicans responded so quickly and so vociferously to what he had to say.
What do you think that message is, Ruth, if he's sending it to his other colleagues? If this isn't actually going at Sessions, but I mean, what does he hope for from sending this message, do you think?
Well, I think he had hoped at the start of the week that the Attorney General would get the message and leave gently. And who would have bet against that? I mean, it seemed obvious that this marriage couldn't be saved and this situation couldn't continue. But then we saw, and this was one of a number of rebukes that the president suffered this week. He was rebuked by the Boy Scouts for his speech. He was rebuked by police chiefs and police officers for encouraging violence. He was rebuked by his own military for by inaction. For tweeting about transgender without working it through the process. He was rebuked by the Senate on health care, and he was also very sharply rebuked by the Senate on his Attorney General. Maybe he'll hear some of this. Maybe General Kelly will help him hear some of this. TBD.